So for those joining us, I am Professor Hines, and today we're actually doing an editorial shoot where I'm going to show you a behind the scenes session with Erin J here, who's our model for today. And we're going to go through, show you how to go about taking portrait photos. I like using interesting locations, so that's how come we're kind of around here in this parking garage area here in downtown. So the premise of this is we are going to be using just a one lens setup and a one light setup. It's going to be very simple. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So I'll run through what my settings are going to be for my camera, and then the lighting that I'm using, it's an LED light. And I can use it as a strobe, but I prefer the constant light. So I want Dave, my assistant here, to pan over to this wall. So with the timing of today, we have the light that's coming off of this wall. It's given a nice warm tone with the sunlight, so we get a nice golden hue on the side of her face. With that though, you see that she is dark along the side, so we do want to fill that light. So my other assistant is going to turn the light for me and put that all the way on 6,000 for me. There you go. So you see how we do get that fill light. And actually, yeah, the light is pretty good right there. So we get that fill light, so that way we don't have the harsh shadow on the right side of her face. And you have this nice golden tone. Keep that in mind. That's going to be the whole premise of our shoot, even into the photo editing. We want that golden tone that you see here, and we're going to carry that onto our post-processing. So any questions that you may have, just leave them in the comment section and I will answer them at the end of this video. So, okay, Erin. So my settings right now is I'm shooting with a Sony a7C Mark II, and this is an 85mm 1.8 lens. My settings are kind of going to range from 1.8 to maybe a 2.8 on aperture. I'm at a 0.3 for my exposure value and an ISO 200. So yes, that's very nice, Erin. So we're going to take a few photos of her here. I like that. Yes, I like your hand up at your face like that. Beautiful. Beautiful. I'm going to show you a few of those. Those look really good. Show our community there what we have. Looks pretty good. Yeah. So one thing that I will mention, it's good to always show whoever you're photographing the images as you're shooting along, especially for someone that's very inexperienced. What that does, it gives them muscle memory to see what's good and what isn't, so then they kind of know how to position their body to get the perfect pose for when you're doing your shoot. It also helps to where you're going to get better results as the shoot goes on as well. So let's continue and take a few more frames here in this spot. And notice that I'm shooting at a lower angle. The reason I'm doing so is because of my height, I don't want to come above the model's head to where I'm looking down into the ground. By shooting at a low angle, I make my subject look taller, but then I also have to where it's like an infinity background, because your eye is going to continue upward. It's not going to come to a dead end. So that's one reason why I really like photographing at lower angles. And I'll demonstrate that. So this is a low angle shot. And then we'll take one that's a lot higher. And then show the difference. So that's our high angle shot there. And then that's the lower. Look at how much more attractive that is. It's a lot more attractive, especially when you're photographing someone that's very short. You don't want them to look shorter than what they already are. So it just makes the person look taller, and it's a more flattering photo. So I think I really like this spot a lot, but if we look back here, you'll see that there are these stairs. And I really like the dimension of the stairs. So I'm going to have Erin come over towards the steps, my lighting assistant. And so what I like about this is that it kind of has another dimension to it with the stairs. So we're going to use this wall that's here to our right. We're going to have you come up a little bit, right there. Absolutely. And kind of brush that out a bit. Okay. So have the light come in a little bit right here. Oh yes, that's beautiful. Kind of bring it in. Let's maybe put it. Oh, that's good. I like that. That looks good. Okay. So, we kind of got a little bit of the wall on your arm there. It's okay if we missed it. We can always use generative AI in Lightroom to get that out. But if you see a mistake, get it out once you see it. Okay, let's take a few frames there. That's really nice, Aaron. Very nice shots. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Very nice. Great. Show you all some of those. Very nice photos. Okay. Oh, I love how you're just standing there. That's really good. Gonna get really low on this. Very nice. Beautiful shots. Okay, so I'll show you those again. And again, it's always good to show the model how she's doing, or he or she, or how they're doing. So that way they know what poses works, what doesn't. So yeah, I think those work really well. So now that we've gotten a few good shots, I think I kind of want to see how some of these look, go through some of the editing. So I'm actually going to take my phone and connect it with the USB cable, and I can just immediately go into Adobe Lightroom, import select images that I want to work on, and do the post-processing for these images. So I definitely want to say thank you to Aaron, our model, for being our subject for this session. And so let's dive right into Adobe Lightroom and import some images and see how the editing process goes. Here we are in Lightroom Mobile with the album that I created for today's project. I've gone through the process of importing my images into this album, so now I can make my selection for the image that I would like to begin editing first. The first thing you'll notice about this image is that we have a person in the background with a bright blue shirt that's a complete distraction. So to make this portrait a little bit more pleasing, I would want to remove them. And there are two ways to accomplish this. So let's demonstrate them and how they work. The first is with the remove tool. We'll brush over to highlight our selection for removal. So let's go into remove. We have our brush set, and we can change the size depending on how big or small our selection area is that we want to highlight. Now, as you highlight, you'll want to brush outside of the object or subject you're wanting to remove. The additional area outside of your selection will allow the program to better analyze and work to fill the area with the best suited content from other parts of your photo. So there's no need to be precise with this, but just make sure that you have a nice area that's covered, like so. Now that didn't do too bad of a job, but it's not perfect. And that's where the new generative AI feature comes in. And that is the second option that we can utilize to remove that person in the background. And here's how that works. So let's undo this adjustment. We have our person back, and we're going to do the same thing that we did before. But before we do so, we're going to make sure we toggle on this generative AI function here. So with that turned on, now let's make our selection again. And again, this does not have to be precise, but just make sure you have enough area around your subject. It's going to analyze. There it is. Look at how beautiful and clean that is. The difference with this is the generative remove, it analyzes a selection in an image and it generates a fill that blends in with the rest of the image perfectly. Now, let's say you didn't like what the program gave you back. You can actually go a step further by tapping on this refine button. As we enter into refine, we see that we have a few adjustments that we can make here as well. You can actually go through a series of variations to see which variation you may like over one another. In this case, they all look relatively good, so it doesn't matter which one you go with. So we'll just stick with the first selection. The other options that you have here are opacity, which controls the opacity of your adjustment. So if you wanted to bring a little bit of that person back in, you could. And then of course, restore, simply delete your selection. Now in this situation, you saw that the generative remove was actually the better option. But it's not to say that the non-generative remove wasn't. It still has its place because that is a very useful tool for doing quick cleanup adjustments for dust specks, pimples, or other small distractions. And in those instances, there is no need to utilize the generative remove for those smaller, quick cleanups. Now let's move on with our further adjustments. Keeping in line what I mentioned earlier as far as the warm tones that we had, we want that to be what we have in our editing adjustments. So a lot of what we're going to do here is going to revolve around our colors. So let's start by going into our edit panel and let's go into color. And so let's make a few adjustments in our color grading, specifically our midtones. So I want to go into a tone that's more in that warm region. So let's change our hue, go to maybe about 40, 50s range, and then just add the saturation. And we don't need so much because we don't want it to be so outrageous, but just enough to where we add that little bit of pop. And so I'm making my adjustments by using the sliders, but you can also make your adjustments by using these circles here. So if you want to make your adjustments for the color grading here, you can also do that as well. And so that looks pretty good. And then I'm also going to do a luminance adjustment, add a little bit more light to our midtones there. And that looks great. So if we come out of color grading, we'll look at the before. That's what we had without anything. And that's after, with adding our color grading into that, it's starting to come along. The next thing that I want to do is just a minor adjustment to her skin. And so we're going to use the masking for this. So let's go into masking. We're going to add a color range mask. And the reason I'm doing a color range mask is because I want to focus on just her skin. And we want to only highlight that area. Okay, once we have our selection, we'll hit apply. And now we can make our adjustments to our model skin here. And so let's go into light. And I want to go into shadows and open up the shadows a bit. So see how we're just opening up those darker areas. Just get a little more pop in there. And then I also want to make an effects adjustment. And we want to adjust the texture. Now what this will do is give a little bit more softness to her skin. So let's bring down our texture just about to -30. And you can see how much softer that is. That's before, and then that's after. That looks really good. And then the next thing is, while we're this close, I noticed that there are some blemishes that are on her arm that I'd like to remove. So let's go back into our remove tool and we'll disable generative AI because we can just use the remove tool as normal, just for removing those. And that looks good. Perfect. Lastly, I want to apply a profile. Now, one thing with profiles is that many people typically will start with the profile, but I usually like concluding with them because it just adds another creative element. And I just like finishing off that way. So I'm going to go into the modern selection because I really like utilizing these for my people photos. We're going to use this modern 7. And we're going to tap on it again because then we can adjust the intensity of our profile. And so as we go all the way to the left, you see it takes it away. Go to the right, it really intensifies. So you just apply it to however much you like for your particular image. That looks pretty good. So that's what we had originally. And then now that's up to us adding in the profile. And so that looks really good. So after that, by adding our profile, we have a finished image. So that's what we started with. And that's where we ended up, a very nice portrait. Now that we finished this particular photo, as you saw when we first started, we had other images within our album that I wanted to also edit. Well, now that I finished this particular photo, we actually don't have to worry about going through step by step for the other images. We can actually take this particular edit and apply it to other photos as well. And here's how you do that. So we'll tap on these 3 dots that's in the top right corner, and then we're going to select copy settings. And so you can select and deselect whatever you would like to copy over. and then we'll hit our check mark. And now all of our settings are copied. So let's come back to our main gallery and let's choose another photo that we want to edit. So let's say we wanted to edit this particular photo here. But instead of going through step by step as we did before, we can actually just paste those settings. So go back to the top right panel and select these three dots. And now you'll see this selection for pasting settings. And so we'll select that. And then there's our settings applied to this photo. So there's the before, there's the after. Now, if there are any tweaks that you would need to make, you can do those, but then you have something that you've already started with, and you just have to make minor tweaks to that image. So once I finish editing a photo, I'll just simply save it to my device. We'll save that. And then the next thing that I like to do with my images once I finish them is also share them in the Lightroom community. So we'll go back to our share button, and then you'll see this option for post to community. Here you'll give your image a title, add a description, and select the corresponding categories for your image. You can allow the community to save your edit as a preset, as well as you can allow remixing. And what this does, it gives people the opportunity to share their edits on your photo and share them with you so that way you can see them and users in the Lightroom community can also see them as well. I hope you enjoyed viewing this live session today, and I hope that you learned a few new tips and tricks for both capturing portraits as well as the post-processing by utilizing Adobe Lightroom Mobile. Here's a look back at our photo of what we started with, and then our photo and where we ended up at. And now we're going to exit out of Lightroom, and I'm going to take any questions that you all may have in regards to our photo session as well as the post-processing session. So stay tuned. So I saw a few questions. Someone had asked about color grading, specifically when it comes to skin tones, I believe. How do you, big difference on color grading, how do you decide what tones you're looking for, skin tones, environment? It depends. So in this case, because we had the nice wall that's behind me, you kind of see that golden wall there and the sun hitting it. That kind of helps you out as far as what you're wanting to do in terms of I guess color tones for that particular photo. It's kind of giving you the overall look on its own of what that scenario is. So I always lean into that, you know, the same thing based off of what someone is wearing, the colors that they're wearing. You know, I look at the colors that people have on or the colors that's surrounding and kind of go off of that to determine how my color grading is going to be for my overall workflow. So any other questions? Let's see what other questions we have here. Why the 7C2 today? Because it's the only camera that I own. Let's see what other questions. See what else did I miss here? Am I manual focusing today? No, I was using an autofocus setup here. It was a 85 millimeter, and this is an autofocus lens, not a manual. Let's see, what else do we have here for questions? Just scrolling up, seeing what we have. I've seen some of the comments. Breathtaking model. Yes, she was. Definitely agree. As a tall photographer, that is a great game. Yes. If you're tall, because you're going to be towering over most people, you want to have that lower angle. I know it will be uncomfortable for a lot of us tall people, but it just makes for a much more flattering portrait when you're taking that lower angle to actually photograph someone. Let's see, what else do we have here? See a question here. Someone asked the question of Lightroom or Photoshop. It depends on what you're doing. Because I'm mostly color grading, the Lightroom is always going to be my typical overall workflow. The only time I'll go into Photoshop is if I'm having to really manipulate that photo to where I'm, cutting and chopping things out of the image. But if I'm not doing any of that, then it's always just going to be Lightroom for me at that point. But I do use both, but you know, for overall for my images, it's always going to be utilizing Lightroom. How can you edit this image in your desktop? So the photos that I was working on and importing into Lightroom Mobile, I can choose to edit the images directly off of my phone. And when you go into Lightroom, you'll see at the bottom on your mobile device where it has device, and you can just instantly start editing any picture that's on your device. You can, however, bring that image into the cloud. When you import it and bring it into the cloud, then it will actually register on the desktop version of Lightroom. So you can actually edit your photo on the desktop through Lightroom. You can do even through Lightroom Classic. If you're a Classic user, like I am as well, you can even edit your photos there too. So if you want to edit in desktop, you can always bring it into the cloud, and then it will appear there, so that way you can edit there as well. Let's see, what other questions? I'm not answering any camera related questions, so R5 questions or anything about that, I won't answer those in this particular video. Let's see, what else do we have? Do you always use continuous lighting, or do you ever use camera flash? Good question. I always use continuous lighting. I just like seeing what it is that I'm going to get immediately, and know that once I push the shutter on my camera, that's the result that I'm going to get. So I used to shoot with flash many years ago, but I've been pretty much constant light for probably the better part of 7 or so years now. When doing outdoor natural light shots, do you stick to color wheel contrast or just play it by ear? I don't fully think I understand that question as far as what you're asking. When doing outdoor natural light shots, do you stick to color wheel contrast or just play it by ear? I'm not sure I fully understand that question. Let's see what other questions we have. How tall are you? I'm actually 5'10". Let's see what else we have here. What lenses are perfect for portrait shoots? It's whatever is the best lens for whatever situation that you're photographing. You know, using a photo or a lens that's a telephoto, like an 85, as I was using earlier, it's a great lens to use. Because of the distance that I had, I could use something that's longer, like a 100, a 135, 200 millimeter. I mean, if you want to be outrageous and go with the 300 millimeter, you can do that too, if you have the room to do so. It's not to say that you can't use something that's wider either. You know, like if you wanted to use something that's like a 35 or a 25, you just have to make sure that when you're using wider lenses, that where you frame your subject is in a way that it doesn't stretch them. So if you have them along the edges, that's going to, you know, stretch their body parts, and you don't want to do that. So be mindful of that if you're using something that's a wider lens for portraits. Take a few more questions here. How do you take photos with blurred backgrounds? You use a lens that has a very wide aperture, like a 1.8 or a 1.4, but then it also depends on where you're photographing in relation to the focal length. So in this case, I had an 85 millimeter lens. The closer I get to my subject as I'm getting to that minimum focusing distance, it's gonna just blur that background, even at 1.8 f2, even at a 2.8, because what kind of background blur you get is going to be dependent on your distance, but then also in relation to that focal length that you have and the minimum focusing distance of where you are. So if you step back with an 85 and you're still wide open at 1.8, then as you're stepping further away from your subject, that background blur is going to lessen. But as you come closer with the particular lens, then that's going to intensify for that background blur. I hope all of that made sense. I hope it wasn't too technical. Why only A7C II is your only camera? Because it's the only camera that I have. Let's see. His voice is made for this. You typically go for a moody image. Why not this time? I wouldn't say that's true. It depends on what the situation is of what I'm photographing. Now, when it comes to portraits, however, I don't go to the extreme, because the one thing you have to keep in mind with portraits is that you don't want to do anything that degrades a person's skin. So that's why my edits for portraits aren't going to be as, elaborate as street photos, because that can be a little bit grungy. But you don't want that for a beauty headshot or portraits of somebody. So that's why there is a little bit of a difference. But I mean, the underlying tone is still my photo. It's going to have my contrast level, it's going to have my sharpness, all of that is going to be the same. But the overall look in terms of what I'm actually doing with the edit is going to be very different from a street photo, just because we're dealing with the person here and it's about them, and we don't want to do anything that degrades their skin in the photo. Any other questions? Do you edit all your work? Yes, I'm the person that edits every last photo that you ever see. I do not send my pictures out to have edited. Coming back to YouTube soon, yes. Favorite focal length? It just depends on the situation. I absolutely love my 85, but I do love my 55mm lens too. And I mean, even my wide angles, like my 21, really love those focal lengths. Any other questions? Got a couple more minutes here. See if I missed anything. F5.7 is a sweet spot for background blur. It depends. That's not a one size fits all type of situation. The reason being is, as you shoot with different focal lengths, 5.7 on a 100mm can be significant, but if you're using something that's a little wider, it may not be that way. And then again, it just depends on how close or far away you are from a subject too. Is there any negatives to using old vintage lenses? No, I mean, the only difference is that you're going to, not have the same sharpness or colors that you have with more modern lenses. But I mean, no, not really. There's nothing negative. If that's the look that you're going for, use it. Let's see, what else do we have here? I'm trying to go through these as quick as I can. Okay, let's see what questions. Okay, got those. Okay, so I think I kind of went through everything. If I missed a particular question, you can always feel free to shoot me a direct message or leave a comment, and I will answer those questions for you. As always, you can see more of my content and more of my educational material on my website, professorhines.com, and be sure to check out the Lightroom mobile app and submit your images to the community. As I showed in the editing session, I have one of my images from today that's in the community, so you can go and try your hand at editing that photo and share your edits with me. I'd love to see those. So thanks for joining me for today's live portrait session and editing session, and look for more in the future. So until next time, I will see you all in the next video.